The morning started like any other Tuesday at Riverside Correctional Facility. Daniel Wright woke up at 6, made his bed with military precision, and waited for the morning count. 3 years into his sentence, he had the routine down to a science. Breakfast at 7, kitchen duty at 8, lunch prep at 11, simple, predictable, safe. Daniel wasn't like most of the men here. He'd never hurt anyone, never stolen anything in the traditional sense. His crime was numbers on a screen, falsified documents during the worst financial crisis of his life. When his small accounting firm started drowning in debt, he'd made choices that seemed logical at the time but landed him behind bars. 5 years was his sentence. He'd already served more than half. The kitchen was his sanctuary. Most inmates hated the heat and the grease and the endless trays of food, but Daniel found peace in the work. It kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. The head cook, a corrections officer named Rodriguez, had even started trusting him with inventory counts. Trust was rare in prison. Daniel didn't take it lightly. That afternoon, the yard time came around 3 o'clock. October weather in the Northeast meant crisp air and falling leaves, even inside the prison walls. Daniel usually walked the perimeter alone, keeping to himself. He'd learned early that friendships in prison came with complications. Better to stay neutral, invisible even. He was near the equipment shed when they appeared. 3 men spread out just enough to block any easy exit. Daniel recognized them. Everyone did. The tall one in front was Derek, a lifer with dead eyes and a reputation that made even the guards nervous. The other 2 were his shadows, always close, always watching. "We need to talk," Derek said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. That's what made it terrifying. Daniel's heart started racing, but he kept his face neutral. "About what?" "You work in the kitchen." "Access to supplies, access to deliveries." Derek stepped closer. "We need someone reliable, someone smart, someone like you." The request was clear even without details. Contraband, drugs, phones, whatever could be smuggled in through the kitchen loading dock. Daniel had seen it happen before with other workers. It always ended badly. "I can't help you," Daniel said quietly. Derek's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. "Can't or won't?" "Both." The first punch came fast, catching Daniel in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping. Before he could recover, hands grabbed his arms, holding him upright. The next blow hit his face, then another. Daniel tasted blood, felt his eyes swelling shut. They worked him over with practiced efficiency. No wasted movement, nothing that would show too much. Through the pain, Daniel heard Derek's voice close to his ear. "You've got a mother, right? Lives alone in that house on Maple Street? Be a shame if something happened to her because you couldn't be reasonable." The words hit harder than the fists. His mother was 73, living on Social Security in the same house where Daniel grew up. The thought of these people reaching her made his blood run cold. Then it was over. The hands released him and he collapsed onto the concrete. Through his good eye, he saw Boots walking away, casual, unhurried, like nothing had happened. The whistle blew. Guards came running. Daniel lay there, tasting copper and dirt, listening to the shouted orders and radio calls. Strong hands helped him sit up. A guard's face appeared in his swimming vision. "Who did this?" Daniel said nothing. "Come on, Wright. We know you didn't do this to yourself." "Who was it?" The words stuck in his throat. He thought about his mother watering her garden, watching her evening shows, completely unaware that her son's choices behind bars could reach her front door. He thought about Derek's connections, the long reach of prison gangs, the stories he'd heard about retaliation. "I don't know," Daniel finally said. Didn't see them clearly. The guard's expression shifted from concern to frustration. "Don't be stupid. We can help you, but only if you cooperate." Daniel shook his head, immediately regretted it as pain exploded through his skull. "I fell, hit the equipment rack." "That's your story?" "That's what happened. They took him to the infirmary. The nurse, a tired woman who'd probably heard every lie imaginable, cleaned his wounds without comment. 2 cracked ribs, severe bruising, a cut above his eye that needed stitches. She worked efficiently, asked no questions. The doctor who checked him was less sympathetic. "You know this is going in your file," the doctor said, signing off on the treatment form. "Uncooperative victim. That doesn't help you when you're up for early release." Daniel stared at the ceiling tiles. 3 years of perfect behavior and now this. But what choice did he have? Tell the truth and put his mother at risk? Trust that the system could actually protect her from men who had nothing to lose? They returned him to his cell that evening. The walk through the block was silent. Every man they passed looked away, sudden intense interest in their own business. The message was clear. Everyone knew what silence meant. Everyone understood the code. Daniel lay on his bunk that night, every breath sending sharp pains through his ribs. His cellmate, a quiet guy serving time for drug possession, hadn't said a word since he'd returned. That was its own kind of communication. In the darkness, Daniel replayed Derek's words. This wasn't over. The beating was just the opening move. They'd come back with more threats, more pressure. And eventually, he'd have to choose between his principles and his mother's safety. The worst part was that nobody would help him. The guards couldn't protect him every second. The warden didn't know he existed beyond a number and a file. Other inmates wouldn't risk getting involved. He was alone with this burden, trapped between violence and complicity. Daniel touched his swollen face carefully, felt the tight pull of the stitches. Tomorrow he'd have to go back to the kitchen, back to the routine, back to pretending everything was normal. Derek would be watching, waiting, testing to see if the message had been received. As sleep finally came, Daniel's last conscious thought was a simple one. He'd survive today. Tomorrow would take care of itself. It was the only way to get through this, one day at a time, keeping his head down and his mouth shut. He had no idea that his silence, meant to protect everything he loved, was about to set off a chain of events that would change not just his life, but the entire facility. The bruises faded slowly over the next 3 weeks, but the fear never left. Daniel returned to his kitchen duties 2 days after the attack, moving carefully, breathing shallow to avoid the sharp pain in his ribs. Everyone pretended not to notice. The other inmates kept their distance. Even Officer Rodriguez, usually quick with a joke or a word of encouragement, treated him with careful neutrality. Derek didn't approach him again right away. That was somehow worse. Daniel would catch glimpses of him across the yard in the chow line, always watching, always waiting. The anticipation was its own kind of torture. It finally happened during lunch prep on a Thursday. Daniel was alone in the dry storage room, counting sacks of flour for inventory. The door opened behind him. "Time's up, accountant." Derek's voice made Daniel's stomach drop. "We need an answer." Daniel turned slowly, his back against the metal shelving. Derek stood in the doorway, blocking the only exit. "No violence this time. Just presence, I told you," Daniel said, hating how his voice shook. "I can't. You mean won't." Derek pulled out a small photograph, held it up. Daniel's breath caught. It was his mother, taken recently by the look of it, working in her front garden. "Nice lady. Talked to our mutual friend for a good 10 minutes. Very trusting. Invited him in for lemonade." The implications crashed over Daniel like ice water. They'd already made contact. Already proven they could reach her. "What do you want?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Smart man." Derek smiled without warmth.
"Kitchen delivery next Tuesday?"
"There'll be an extra box with the produce. You take it, bring it to cell block C, hand it to my associate. Simple. The guards check everything. Not if you're creative. You're good with numbers, right? Be good with this." Derek tucked the photo back in his pocket. "And right? Your mom mentioned her Tuesday morning walks. Very regular schedule. Be a shame if she got hurt. Old bones don't heal so well." Then he was gone, leaving Daniel alone with the flour sacks and his racing heart. That night, Daniel barely slept. He lay in his bunk, mind spinning through impossible scenarios. Tell the guards and risk his mother's safety. Cooperate and become part of something that could add years to his sentence. There had to be another option, but he couldn't see it. His cellmate finally spoke up around 3 in the morning. "Whatever they got on you, man, it ain't worth it." Daniel said nothing. "I've seen this before. Start small. 1 package, then 2. Then you're in so deep you can't get out. They own you. I don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Just sometimes all the choices are bad." The wisdom in those words didn't help. Daniel stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, in the administrative wing, something else was happening. Patricia Morales had been working at Riverside for 12 years, starting as a receptionist and working her way up to records clerk. It wasn't glamorous work, but she took pride in accuracy. Every file had to be perfect. Every form had to be complete. The quarterly audit was routine. The warden wanted updated statistics for a state review board meeting, and Patricia was the person who made sure the numbers added up. She'd been at it for 3 days, cross-referencing incident reports with behavioral assessments, pulling data from a dozen different databases. That's when Daniel's file caught her eye. She'd seen thousands of inmate files over the years. Most followed predictable patterns. Bad behavior led to write-ups, led to punishment. Good behavior led to commendations, led to early release consideration. Cause and effect. Logic. Daniel's file didn't make sense. 3 years of perfect conduct. Participation in every available program. Multiple positive evaluations from supervisors. Character reference letters from the chaplain and the education coordinator. This was the kind of inmate the system pointed to as a success story. Then came the assault report from 3 weeks ago. Victim uncooperative, refused to identify attackers. No disciplinary action taken, but noted as concerning behavior. Patricia leaned back in her chair thinking. Something felt off. She'd worked here long enough to know the difference between someone who was trouble and someone in trouble. Everything about Daniel's file screamed the latter. She pulled up the incident database, searching for similar patterns. It took an hour, but she found them. 2 other assaults in the past 6 months. Both victims with clean records. Both refused to cooperate with investigations. Both subsequently withdrawn, isolated. Patricia made a note, then pulled the files on the other victims. She checked their visitor logs, their phone records, their backgrounds. Both had elderly parents. Both had been model inmates before the attacks. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, accessing the housing assignments database. She tracked cell movements, looking for common factors, and there it was. In each case, about 2 weeks before the assault, there had been a housing reassignment. Someone new had been moved close to the victim's cell. The same someone in all 3 cases. Derek Vaughn. Patricia printed out Vaughn's file, her printer humming in the quiet office. His jacket was thick. Multiple priors, gang affiliation, history of extortion and intimidation at 2 previous facilities. Currently serving life without parole for a crime that made Patricia's skin crawl. She spread the documents across her desk, seeing the pattern emerge like a photograph developing. 3 clean inmates, 3 attacks, 3 refusals to cooperate, 1 common denominator, and underneath it all she'd bet money there were threats, leverage, something that made strong men choose silence over justice. Patricia checked the clock. 7 p.m. Most of the administrative staff had gone home. The warden was probably still here, though. Helen Bradshaw had a reputation for working late, for caring about details that other wardens ignored. This qualified as a detail that mattered. Patricia gathered her documents, organized them into a clear timeline, and wrote a 3-page summary. She highlighted the connections, noted the patterns, and flagged it as urgent. Then she did something that could get her in trouble with her supervisor. She bypassed the normal chain of command and walked directly to the warden's office. The door was open. Warden Bradshaw sat behind her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewing what looked like budget reports. Patricia knocked on the doorframe. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I found something in the quarterly audit that I think you need to see." The warden looked up, taking in Patricia's expression and the folder in her hands. "Come in." Patricia stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "It's about an inmate named Daniel Wright, and I think there's something very wrong happening in this facility." She laid the folder on the warden's desk. Outside, the evening shift was settling in for another long night. In his cell, Daniel stared at the ceiling, dreading Tuesday. And somewhere in cell block C, Derek was making plans, confident that his system was foolproof. None of them knew that the wheels were already turning. That sometimes the smallest detail noticed by the right person at the right time could change everything. Warden Helen Bradshaw had learned to trust her instincts over 25 years in corrections. Right now, every instinct was screaming that Patricia had uncovered something serious. She read through the documents twice, making notes in the margins, circling connections, drawing lines between incidents. "How long have you been working on this?" Helen asked, not looking up from the papers. "I found the pattern this afternoon," Patricia said. "Spent the last few hours verifying everything before bringing it to you." Helen removed her reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Derek Vaughn. I remember when he transferred here. Maximum security rejected him after an incident with a guard. We were supposed to be his last stop." "He's been running something," Patricia said carefully. "I can't prove it yet, but the pattern is clear. Clean inmates with vulnerable families. Attacks. Silence. And Vaughn is always nearby when it happens. Extortion." Helen leaned back in her chair. Classic pattern. Find someone with something to lose, make them your mule. They can't report it without risking what they're trying to protect. What do we do? Helen was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications. If she moved too fast, Vaughn would know someone was watching. The operation would go underground, and they'd lose their chance to dismantle it completely. But if she moved too slow, more inmates would get hurt. We investigate, Helen finally said, quietly. I want to know everything. Who's involved, what they're moving, how the network operates. But Patricia, this stays between us and a few people I trust. No paperwork that could leak. No casual conversations. Understood? Patricia nodded. Understood. Go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start building a real case. But sleep didn't come easy for either of them that night. Helen lay awake, mentally reviewing the security protocols that had failed. Patricia tossed and turned, thinking about Daniel and the other victims suffering in silence while the system failed them. The next morning, Helen called in Captain Torres, her head of security. He'd been at Riverside for 15 years and she trusted him completely. They met in her office before the facility fully woke up. I need your best people on something sensitive, Helen said, sliding Patricia's report across the desk. Read it, tell me what you see. Torres read carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. Extortion ring. Using family as leverage. Classic protection racket. That's what I think too. Can we prove it? We can try. Torres pulled out a notepad. We'll need to monitor communications, track commissary transactions, watch who talks to who in the yard. If Vaughn's running this, he's got lieutenants, people who handle the actual muscle work. We find them, we find the operation. How long? Week, maybe 2. Depends how careful they've been, Helen nodded. Do it. But Torres, if any of these victims are in immediate danger, we pull them out first. Cases are important, but lives matter more. Agreed. Over the next 7 days, the investigation unfolded in the shadows. Torres handpicked 3 officers known for their discretion. They started with the obvious things. Video footage from common areas looking for repeated patterns of contact. Commissary records tracking who was buying what and for whom. Phone logs checking for suspicious patterns in outgoing calls. What they found was sophisticated. Vaughn rarely made direct contact with his victims. He used intermediaries, different people for different jobs. One guy made the threats. Another collected the contraband. A third handled the money flowing in from outside connections. The operation had been running for at least 8 months, possibly longer. But they made a mistake. Everyone makes a mistake eventually. One of Torres's officers, a sharp woman named Chen, was reviewing visitor logs when she noticed something odd. 3 different inmates, all with clean records, had suddenly started refusing family visits around the time they were attacked. That was backwards from normal behavior. Usually inmates who got hurt wanted to see their families more, not less. Chen dug deeper. She pulled the visitor request forms, the ones inmates filled out when they wanted to add or remove people from their approved lists. In each case, the inmate had written a short note explaining why they were canceling visits. The handwriting was shaky. The explanations were vague. But the subtext was clear. Stay away, it's not safe. They're protecting their families, Chen reported to Torres, keeping them away from the facility so Vaughn's people can't make contact during visits. Which means the threats are ongoing, Torres said grimly. This isn't just about 1 or 2 shipments. He's got these guys locked in long term. They brought their findings to Helen. The picture was complete now. Derek Vaughn had built a systematic operation targeting inmates with elderly parents or sick relatives. People who couldn't risk refusing. People who would do anything to keep their loved ones safe. The evidence was damning, but it was also circumstantial. They had patterns, suspicious behaviors, and clear motives. What they didn't have was proof solid enough to stand up in court, and they definitely didn't have testimony from any victims. We need someone to come forward, Helen said, stating the obvious problem. Without a witness, Vaughn walks. Maybe we can move him to another facility, disrupt the operation temporarily, but he'll just start over somewhere else. What about Wright? Patricia suggested. She'd been included in the core investigative team. He's the most recent victim. Maybe he's the most likely to cooperate. Or the most scared, Torres countered. Fresh threats. Fresh trauma. Why would he trust us now when he didn't trust us then? Helen stared at Daniel's file thinking. The man had 3 years of perfect behavior. He'd taught himself bookkeeping in the prison library, earned a certificate in small business management, volunteered to mentor other inmates in the education program. By all accounts, he was exactly the kind of person the system was supposed to rehabilitate, and now he was trapped in a nightmare that the system had failed to prevent. "I'll talk to him," Helen said finally. Personally, Torres raised an eyebrow. "The warden doesn't usually do inmate interviews. This isn't a usual situation. If I'm asking someone to risk everything, they deserve to hear it from me. They deserve to know that someone in authority actually cares." "When?" "Today, this afternoon. Set it up as a routine administrative review. Nothing that looks suspicious. And Torres, I want eyes on Wright until I can get to him. If Vaughn suspects we're closing in, he might decide to eliminate problems." The words hung heavy in the air. They were talking about murder now. Not just extortion or assault, but the real possibility that Derek would kill to protect his operation. Patricia spoke up quietly. "There's something else you should know. Tuesday is delivery day for the kitchen. According to the pattern, that's when transfers usually happen. If Vaughn's pressuring Wright, it's probably building to something this week." Helen checked her calendar. Tuesday was 3 days away. "Then we move now," she decided. "Torres, increase surveillance on Vaughn and his known associates. Patricia, pull together everything we have in a format I can show to Wright. Evidence that we know what's happening, that we believe him, that we can actually protect him if he cooperates." "And if he still refuses?" Torres asked. Helen's jaw tightened. "Then we do what we can with what we have. But I'm not letting another inmate get hurt because we moved too slow. Not on my watch." They dispersed with their assignments. The clock was ticking now. Somewhere in the facility, Daniel was counting down the hours until Tuesday, believing he was completely alone. And somewhere else, Derek was finalizing plans, confident that fear was stronger than hope. Neither of them knew that the warden herself was about to walk into Daniel's cell with an offer that would change everything. The question was whether Daniel would have enough faith left to accept it. Daniel was in his cell reading when the guard appeared at his door. "Right, you've got an administrative meeting. Come with me." His stomach dropped. Administrative meetings usually meant bad news. Problems with his case. Issues with parole eligibility. Or worse, maybe Derek had set him up somehow, planted something in his cell or his locker. "What's this about?" Daniel asked, standing slowly. "Above my pay grade," the guard said. "Not unkind, just factual. Let's go." They walked through the facility in silence. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. They passed the usual administrative offices and kept going. The guard stopped at a door Daniel had never entered before. The warden's office. His confusion must have shown on his face. "Go on in," the guard said. "She's expecting you." Daniel stepped inside. The office was smaller than he'd imagined, filled with filing cabinets and stacks of reports. Behind the desk sat Warden Helen Bradshaw, a woman he'd only seen from a distance during facility inspections. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, tired eyes that looked like they'd seen everything. "Sit down, Daniel," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. He sat, hands gripping his knees. Wardens didn't call inmates by their first names. Something was very wrong. Helen studied him for a moment, then pushed a folder across the desk. "I'm going to be direct with you because we don't have time for games. I know what Derek Vaughn did to you. I know he's threatening your mother. And I know he's forcing you to smuggle contraband through the kitchen." Daniel's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Helen's voice was firm but not unkind. "You've been a model inmate for 3 years. Perfect record. Then you get beaten badly enough to crack your ribs and you refuse to identify your attackers. That doesn't happen without a reason. I told the guards. I didn't see who it was." Helen opened the folder, turned it so Daniel could see. "We've been investigating for the past week. Derek Vaughn has been running an extortion operation in this facility for at least 8 months. You're not the first victim. You're the third that we know of, probably not the last." Daniel stared at the documents, reports, photos, timelines. They knew. They actually knew. "You're not in trouble," Helen continued. "But I need you to understand something. We can stop this. We can protect you and your mother, but only if you help us." The words he'd been waiting to hear for 3 weeks: protection, safety, hope. But Daniel had learned not to trust easily. "How?" His voice came out rough. "You can't watch my mother 24/7. And I've still got 2 years left in here. What happens after your investigation ends?" When things go back to normal, your mother will be placed in a protection program, Helen said. Local police will do regular checks on her home. We'll set up a direct line she can call anytime, day or night. As for you, you'll be transferred to a different facility within 48 hours of testifying, somewhere Derek and his network can't reach. You're asking me to snitch. The word felt heavy in his mouth. I'm asking you to do the right thing. There's a difference. Daniel looked down at his hands. 3 years ago, doing the right thing had seemed simple. Don't steal. Don't hurt people. Follow the rules. Then life got complicated and suddenly the right thing wasn't so clear anymore. There are other victims, Helen said quietly. 2 other men going through exactly what you're going through right now. Living in fear. Protecting their families the only way they know how. If you come forward, they might find the courage to do the same. Or Derek might kill me for starting this. We won't let that happen. Daniel laughed, bitter and tired. You didn't let the first beating happen either, but it happened anyway. You didn't stop Derek from getting photos of my mother, but he's got them. How exactly are you going to protect us when you couldn't protect us before? The words came out harsher than he intended, but he was too exhausted to care. Helen didn't flinch. You're right, she said. We failed you. We missed the signs. Didn't see the pattern until a records clerk noticed something in your file that didn't add up. That's on us, on me. But I'm trying to fix it now, and I can't do that without your help. The honesty surprised him. Wardens didn't usually admit mistakes. What exactly do you need from me? Daniel asked. Your testimony. Everything Derek said to you. Everything he threatened, every detail of what he wanted you to do. We have circumstantial evidence, but we need a witness. Someone willing to stand up in a hearing and tell the truth. A hearing where Derek will be in the room, where he'll hear every word I say. Yes. Daniel closed his eyes. The beating had been bad. The fear had been worse. But betraying the code, standing up as a witness, that came with consequences he couldn't even imagine. I need time to think, he said. Time is something we don't have much of, Helen replied. Tuesday is delivery day. If Derek's planning for you to move contraband, it's happening in 3 days. Once you make that transfer, you're complicit. You become part of his operation, and legally that changes everything. So I'm trapped. Do what he says and become a criminal, or testify and become a target, or testify and become free. Helen leaned forward. Daniel, I've read your entire file. I know about your accounting fraud case. I know you did it to try to save your business, to keep your employees paid. You made a bad choice under pressure, but you owned it. You've served your time with dignity. Don't let Derek destroy that. Don't let him turn you into something you're not. Her words hit harder than Derek's fists had. For 3 weeks, Daniel had felt like a coward, hiding behind silence, letting fear control him. He'd told himself it was about protecting his mother, but maybe part of it was just being afraid. If I do this, Daniel said slowly, and something happens to my mom because of it, I'll never forgive myself, or you. Nothing will happen to her. You have my word. The word of the warden who didn't see this coming in the first place. Helen nodded, accepting the hit. Fair enough. So let me give you something else. A guarantee. If anything happens to your mother, anything at all, I will personally ensure that Derek and everyone involved faces maximum consequences. I'll testify myself if I have to. This ends, Daniel. One way or another. The only question is whether you're part of ending it or part of it continuing. Daniel sat in silence, the weight of the decision crushing down on him. Everything he'd done for 3 years, all the work to become better, to prove he'd learned from his mistakes, it all came down to this moment. The other victims, he finally said, the ones you mentioned, are they willing to testify? We haven't approached them yet. We wanted to talk to you first. Why me? Because your file showed us you're someone who cares about doing right. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Daniel thought about his mother. About the garden she loved, the life she'd built, the peace she deserved in her final years. He thought about the other inmates living in the same fear he'd been living with. He thought about who he wanted to be when he walked out of here in 2 years. I want it in writing, he said. Everything you promised. The protection program. The transfer. All of it. Helen pulled out a document from her desk drawer. Already prepared. Read it carefully. Take your time. Daniel read through every line twice. Legal language, official seals, signatures from the warden and the facility attorney. It looked real. It looked legitimate. But paper promises had failed before. He picked up the pen Helen offered. His hand shook slightly as he held it over the signature line. "Once I sign this, there's no going back," he said. "No," Helen agreed, "but going forward is better than staying trapped." Daniel signed his name. The ink looked very dark against the white paper. "Final. Irreversible. What happens now?" he asked. "Now we keep you safe until the hearing. You'll be moved to protective custody tonight, and Daniel, you did the right thing." He wanted to believe her. As guards escorted him to a different cell block away from Derek's reach, Daniel tried to feel relieved. But all he felt was scared and exposed, like he'd just painted a target on his back. In her office, Helen made phone calls. To the district attorney. To local police. To the facility where Daniel would transfer. The machinery of justice was slow, but she'd make it move faster. And in cell block C, Derek sensed something had changed. The way guards looked at him. The subtle shift in routine. He'd been in the system long enough to recognize when walls were closing in. Tuesday was coming. One way or another, everything would change. The protective custody cell was quieter than Daniel expected. No cellmate, no noise from the block, just silence and his own racing thoughts. He'd made his choice, signed the papers, agreed to testify. Now came the hard part, living with that decision. Monday passed in a blur of meetings. The district attorney, a sharp woman with kind eyes, walked him through what testimony would look like. The questions they'd ask. The evidence they'd present. How the hearing would proceed. "Derek will be there," she reminded him. "His attorney will cross-examine you. It won't be pleasant." "I know," Daniel said, though knowing it and being ready for it were two different things. That evening, Helen stopped by his cell personally. "Your mother is safe," she said. "Local police did a welfare check this afternoon." Explained the situation without alarming her. "She's been moved to a secure location temporarily, just as a precaution." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. "She okay?" "Scared for you. Proud of you. She wanted me to tell you that she loves you and that she's not afraid." His eyes burned. "She's braver than I am." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear," Helen said. "It's doing what's right despite the fear. You're here, aren't you?" The hearing was set for Wednesday morning. 2 other inmates came forward after learning Daniel had agreed to testify. Just like Helen predicted, his courage gave them courage. Together, their testimonies painted a clear picture of Derek's operation. Wednesday arrived cold and gray. Daniel dressed in his cleanest prison uniform, hands shaking as he buttoned the shirt. A guard he didn't recognize escorted him to the administrative hearing room. It was smaller than a real courtroom, but felt just as intimidating. Derek sat at a table with his attorney, dressed in prison orange, hands cuffed in front of him. When Daniel entered, Derek's eyes locked onto his. No expression, no anger, just cold, empty calculation. That look said everything. Derek knew, and Derek would remember. Daniel took his seat at the witness table, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. His voice was steadier than he felt. The questions started simple. His name, his sentence, his job assignment. Then they moved deeper. The district attorney guided him through the entire story. The confrontation by the equipment shed, the beating, the threats against his mother, the photograph, the demand to smuggle contraband. Daniel spoke clearly, keeping his eyes forward, refusing to look at Derek. Every word felt like a confession and a liberation at the same time. Derek's attorney was less gentle. "Isn't it true you have a history of dishonesty? You're serving time for fraud, correct?" "Yes." "So why should we believe you're telling the truth now?" "Because I have nothing to gain from lying. I'm already serving my sentence. Testifying here doesn't reduce my time. It just makes me a target." "A target," the attorney repeated. "Sounds dramatic. Or maybe you're just trying to get favorable treatment from the warden." Daniel met the attorney's eyes. "I'm trying to stop other people from going through what I went through. That's all." The other 2 victims testified next. Their stories matched Daniel's almost exactly. Different details, same pattern. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records showing suspicious communications, commissary transactions that didn't make sense, guard observations of Derek's movements and meetings. Captain Torres testified about the investigation, laying out how they'd uncovered the operation. Patricia testified about the patterns in the files that first caught her attention. Even Officer Rodriguez from the kitchen testified about subtle changes he'd noticed in Daniel's behavior after the assault. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, Derek's attorney had stopped objecting. The evidence was too clear, the testimonies too consistent. The administrative judge, brought in from another facility to ensure impartiality, didn't take long to reach a decision. Derek and 6 other inmates involved in the operation were found guilty of extortion, assault, conspiracy, and trafficking contraband. Additional sentences were added to their time. Derek, already serving life, was recommended for transfer to a maximum security facility with solitary confinement. When the verdict was read, Derek finally showed emotion. Rage flashed across his face, gone in an instant but unmistakable. Daniel felt it like a physical touch, but it was over. Actually over. Helen kept her promises. Daniel was transferred to a minimum security facility 2 states away within 24 hours. The new place was different, cleaner, calmer, more focused on rehabilitation than punishment. He got a single cell and a job in the library, helping other inmates with literacy programs. His mother returned home after 2 weeks, once police confirmed Derek's network had been completely dismantled. She called Daniel every Sunday, telling him about her garden, her church group, her neighbors. Normal life continuing despite everything. The other 2 victims who testified were transferred as well. One wrote to Daniel a few months later, thanking him for going first, for showing them it was possible to stand up. Daniel served the remaining 2 years of his sentence without incident. He earned an associate's degree through the prison education program, learned woodworking in the vocational shop, attended every rehabilitation course offered. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to leave as a different person than he'd entered. On his release day, 2 years after the hearing, Daniel walked out into bright sunshine wearing donated clothes and carrying a small box of belongings. His mother waited by her old car, tears streaming down her face. They hugged for a long time. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I'm just glad it's over." "It's not over, sweetheart. It's just beginning," she was right. Daniel had a job lined up at a small accounting firm that specialized in hiring people with records. The owner believed in second chances. So did Daniel's new parole officer, who'd reviewed his file and called him personally to say she was impressed by his turnaround. A week after his release, Daniel received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a short letter on official Riverside Correctional Facility letterhead. "Daniel, your testimony helped us implement new protocols for identifying and investigating victimization patterns in correctional facilities. The changes you helped create will protect inmates across the state system. Your silence almost destroyed you, but your courage saved others. Thank you. Warden Helen Bradshaw." Daniel kept that letter in his wallet. On hard days when the past felt too heavy, when job applications asked about his criminal record, when people looked at him differently after learning where he'd been, he'd take it out and read it. Courage saved others. He'd spent 3 years trying to be invisible, trying to survive by keeping his head down. Then he'd spent 3 weeks trapped in fear, believing silence was his only option. But in the end, speaking up had been the thing that freed him. Not just legally, but in a deeper way he was still learning to understand. Daniel rebuilt his life slowly, started attending a support group for formerly incarcerated people, volunteered at a nonprofit that helped families of inmates navigate the system. Eventually, he started speaking at local schools about choices and consequences and second chances. His story became something bigger than himself. A reminder that systems fail, but people can fix them. That courage isn't about being fearless, it's about acting despite fear. That silence might feel safe, but truth is what actually sets you free. 5 years after his release, Daniel got a call from Patricia, the records clerk who'd first noticed the pattern in his file. She'd been promoted to assistant warden at a different facility and wanted his input on implementing victim protection protocols. "You saved my life," Daniel told her during their meeting. "You and Warden Bradshaw. You didn't have to care, but you did." Patricia shook her head. "You saved your own life. We just opened the door. You were brave enough to walk through it." Maybe they were both right. Daniel's journey wasn't a fairy tale. He still struggled with guilt over his original crime, still had nightmares occasionally about